Welcome to the Bucknuts Happy Hour. It's been a few weeks since we've done one of these. I had some stuff going on personally, nothing too crazy, but just busy with other stuff, and we weren't able to get a time schedule to do this. So happy to be back doing the Bucknuts Happy Hour. We're going to dive into the football team, which will start spring practice next week. We're going to take a look at both sides of the trenches, offensive line, defensive line. And then in the kind of the second half, the latter part of the show, we'll talk about this Buckeye basketball team a little bit and kind of the resurgence here at the end of the season, 1-2 games in a row. But let's get into football, as I know that's why many of you tune into these shows. And to talk with me today is none other than Bucknuts' own Dave Biddle and a friend. Dave, who you got there for the happy hour?
Got my buddy Scooby is here. We also have Anna down here. Anna, you're allowed to come up too, but Scooby's the one on my lap because he was so persistent. I had to let him up here.
All right. Well, if you're not watching this live, Dave has a cute little dog sitting on his lap. That we'll see what the dog thinks about the Buckeyes' offensive and defensive line, huh? Dave, when I talked to you about doing some kind of position breakdown today, the first thing you said was offensive line. I guess just to keep it simple, why did you think that was the most important thing to talk about here early on?
Well, I mean, quarterback is the obvious one, but, I just feel like offensive line, they have to replace not only 3 starters, but, 3 guys that are going to go within the first 3 rounds of the NFL draft as I let Scooby down here. All right, don't go attack Anna too much. You're looking at – Paris Johnson Jr. is going to be a first-round pick. DeJuan Jones is getting some first-round buzz. I think he's more of a second-round pick, but he won't be any worse than a second-round pick, and I won't be surprised if he's a late first-rounder. And then Luke Whippler, I think a lot of people raised their eyebrows, myself included, when he left early. But everybody's doing like a 3-round mock draft, has him going, at least in the 3rd round. So you're losing 3 quality guys, and who's going to replace those? It's not like they've, recruited like crazy. It's not like at wide receiver where, you lose Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson to the draft, first-round picks, and then you lose Jackson Smith and Jigba, but it almost doesn't, hurt the team that much because you have Marvin Harrison and you have Emeka Egbuka. It's not like that on the offensive line. They haven't recruited terribly, but they haven't recruited great. So who's going to fill in for Paris Johnson Jr. at left tackle? I think it's going to be Josh Fryer, but how's he going to do? I thought he was really good as a right guard. Also repped at right tackle last year, was also the jumbo tackle, as we all know. Kind of the similar role that Donovan Jackson served the previous year. So who's going to fill in for Paris Johnson? That's huge. Who's going to be the right tackle? Is it going to be Zen Michalski? Could it be Tegra Shabola? I think it's going to be one of those two, Zen Michalski or Tegra Shabola. I think that's going to be a nice battle in spring at right tackle. And then center, to me, is going to be a very interesting battle. Is it going to be redshirt freshman Carson Hinsman, or is it going to be the transfer from Louisiana Monroe, Vic Cutler, who also can play other spots, including left tackle? But I think they're going to keep him as an interior guy. I know you've talked with him. You could speak more about that, Patrick. But that's why that was the first thing out of my mind. Obviously quarterback is what we're, that's, the kind of the most interesting thing. But I don't think Ryan Day is really going to tell us, even though I bet he knows right now. I don't think Ryan Day is going to tell us too much during spring or even after spring. Why would he? But the offensive line, I don't know if it's a concern, but it's definitely piqued my interest. I'll say that.
Certainly. I mean, look, it doesn't matter who the quarterback is if they don't get an offensive line figured out, right? That's going to be 1B, I think, to the quarterback battle at 1A. And I know it's not as sexy of a position, but if they don't have a center and 2 tackles that are ready to compete at a Big Ten level out of the gates, then you're gonna have some issues. This team walks right into Big Ten play with playing at Indiana to start 2023. So certainly an issue. You mentioned center, and I thought it was interesting that Ryan Day pretty much said the Buckeyes were surprised Luke Whippler left. And you said there are projections with him as a top 3 round guy. So to your starter, I get it. But going back and looking at some of Luke Whippler's tape, I wouldn't say he was dominant. Would you? Do you think that this was the right decision for him?
Well, if he goes in the 3rd round, I think it is, and it sounds like he will probably go in the 3rd round. It's tough to say. When I first saw that news, I was just like, man, I hope this is not one of those situations where it's a kid, had a great game against Georgia against a great defensive line. Maybe was he getting some bad advice? But now you have all these experts coming out, and we'll see. And I think his film actually was pretty good this past season. I really do. And I thought he was good as a redshirt freshman too. It just took me off guard because I've seen a lot of good. I know you have too. We've seen a lot of, I shouldn't even say good. We've seen a lot of great centers come through Ohio State. He's the first one that's left after 3 years. I'll go back to, and there's more that we could pick from, but I'll start with LaCharles Bentley. Okay. He didn't leave after 3 years. He stayed at least 4, maybe 5. I think 4. Nick Mangold was another one. Alex Topanovich was, even though he wasn't like a high pick, I think Alex Topanovich was still like a 3rd round pick or something. He didn't leave after 3 years. He was a fourth year guy. Nick Mangold, 1st round pick, 4th year guy. Billy Price, 5th year guy, 1st round pick. Pat Elfline, 5th year guy, 3rd round pick. Josh Myers, 4th year guy, 2nd round pick. So it's like he's the first one to do it. Now, I like Luke Whippler a lot. I think he's going to do well. Did he make a mistake? I'll say no, because I think he's going to be a 3rd round pick, and that's still good money. And then if he plays well, where he's really going to cash in is that 2nd contract. And, was he going to work himself into a 1st round pick? Perhaps. I mean, he has similar measurables to Tyler Linderbaum from Iowa, who was a 1st round pick in this past year's draft. So you could make the argument that if he came back, he could have worked himself into a 1st round pick. But if he's a 3rd round pick, that's still good money. And then he's only 4 years away from that 2nd contract if he plays well. Just ask I left out Corey Lindsley, 5th round pick, who's making more money than any of those guys that I just mentioned. I know he wasn't an early round pick. Corey Lindsley, 5 years at Ohio State. So, I mean, Luke Whippler's kind of, breaking the glass there. We'll see how it works.
Well, I think it's always interesting when we discuss guys leaving before their eligibility's up. I mean, some guys it's a no-brainer, right? But other guys, like you said, could he have come back and helped himself? Quite possibly when we're talking Luke Whippler. But we also don't know what's going on behind the scenes with Luke Whippler personally. Maybe it was a matter of let's get to the league as quickly as possible and let's start making the money. There's a variety of reasons guys elect to go, not just, this is the best time to go potentially. Quickly, I think it's pretty obvious on the 2 tackles. They were both ready to go. Paris Johnson walked in here to Ohio State and was expected to be a 3-year guy, started for 2 years, and showed what he could do at multiple positions. DeJuan Jones, I think, is the interesting one to me as we look forward to this next year's offensive line, because he wasn't like a highly recruited guy. He was a guy who came through and was developed by Ohio State. He obviously had all the physical tools, was a basketball player predominantly in high school. And so I'm really interested to see how Ohio State can take what they did with DeJuan Jones. And obviously the coaching on the offensive line has changed a little bit, but evolve that into some of these other guys that you mentioned at the beginning of this, guys that are going to need to develop into positions. Who do you think are the potential guys that could maybe be that next DeJuan Jones, guys that in a couple of years we're talking about as, that could be a 1st round pick that maybe we didn't see coming when they first got here?
Yeah, I don't know if Tegra, qualifies because, he was a big time recruit, but Tegra Shabola is a guy that's going to be completely in the mix, and is a guy that the NFL scouts will eventually like. If he takes care of his business, which I think he will, he seems like a serious dude. I don't know him all that well, but I got a chance to do a one-on-one interview with him when we were down there at the Peach Bowl media day in Atlanta, and he seems like a serious dude to me. That's the first time I really got a chance to interview Tegra. And he's straight out of Central Casting for a right tackle, man. I mean, he's like 6'6", 330, moves well, strong kid, naturally strong. And now he's going to be able to get in that Mickey Marotti strength program for a full year. He's one to definitely keep an eye on. I like Carson Hinsman a lot. This is going to be very telling. I mean, Luke Whippler, speaking of him, as a redshirt freshman, took over that job. We all thought it'd be Harry Miller. We didn't know what was going on with Harry Miller at the time. We all know now. But speaking from a football perspective, Luke Whippler is a redshirt freshman. Even if he backed into that job, took the ball and ran with it and played well. So if Carson Hinsman is the starting center, can he play on that level or at least close to what Luke Whippler did? If he does, that's a good sign. Jacob James is out for the spring. He'll be in the mix as a 4th-year player, but I tend to think it's going to be Carson Hinsman. Even when Jacob James is healthy, I tend to think it's going to be Carson Hinsman or Vic Cutler. So I'll say, Tegra is the one I'm really keeping a close eye on, and then probably Carson Hinsman as well.
Vic Cutler is an interesting story because it's not like he transferred in from one of the Power 5 conferences. He was playing at Louisiana Monroe the last few seasons. And as you mentioned earlier, I got to talk to him earlier this week. I'll have a story on him maybe before this is even up on Bucknuts, if not shortly after. But he's a guy who has really kind of bet on himself with this situation. He entered the transfer portal because he felt like he could do a little bit more than what he was doing. He was surprised to hear from Justin Fry in Ohio State, but was very excited. This is a kid who grew up cheering for Michigan. He was from Detroit originally, though he's lived in Louisiana the last 11 years. And he said he's all Buckeye now. Wouldn't use the Michigan name when I talked to him, kept calling him the team up north. So he's made the shift to the other side of the rivalry. But he said he is willing to do whatever they need him to do to play on this offensive line. That's his goal. Whether that be line up at center, whether that be play tackle. He told me he didn't take football super seriously until really partway through high school when he started to realize that there was an opportunity here. And so he seems like a guy who can still develop quite a bit, especially now in the Ohio State facility. You mentioned Mickey Marotti earlier, but just working with that strength staff, with all the stuff that Ohio State has at the Woody, things that he did not have access to at Louisiana Monroe, I think the sky's the limit for a guy like that who's willing to put in the work. Now, he's not the biggest guy. I think he's listed at about 6'3". So is he your stereotypical tackle? No, but he did play it against Texas and Alabama last year and said when he saw those two teams on the schedule, even in the offseason, he put his full focus on making sure he was ready for those two teams and playing his best game and whatnot. And so I asked him, okay, how do you then take that and make it an every week thing with the Buckeyes? And he said he pretty much has no other choice. If he wants to be successful at Ohio State, that's the approach he's going to have to take. So there's more to that interview that I'll have in the story, but I'm really interested to see where they use him because my initial impressions were, okay, he's going to be a guy who probably develops for a year. But Ryan Day mentioned him in the competition for that center spot. Dave, do you think you can make that jump from the Sun Belt Conference to the Big Ten in one offseason?
Absolutely. I do. Not that he's going to be a superstar, but he could be very much like what Jonah Jackson was when he transferred. I know Rutgers is in the Big Ten, but it's a lower tier Big Ten for sure. And Jonah Jackson came in. That was 1 year. Vic Cutler, as you know, has 2 years. So I'm not saying he's going to be as good as Jonah Jackson, who actually was honorable mention All Big Ten before he transferred to Ohio State. But yes, and I like that Vic Cutler, even though he's 6'3", that he can play all 5 positions because 6'3", we look at that. Okay, you can't play tackle at 6'3", and I agree with that. But let's not forget, it's not like he's 5'10". Like the Bengals, which is probably not the best example to use for offensive line. The Bengals starting offensive tackles this past season, Jonah Williams and Lyle Collins, both 6'4". So we're not like talking like. So in a pinch, could he play left tackle? Yes, he has experience doing that, and played relatively well. Now they're bringing him here as an interior lineman, probably a center. I also love Patrick that there was no promises made to him, and he made that clear, and he's cool with it. He's like, great, I want to be a Buckeye. I want to come in here and compete, bet on myself. I bet he thinks he'll be a starter, and you want that attitude. I think at the very, very, very worst, he'll be the 6th man on that offensive line, a guy that can play all 5 positions, and it's going to be a really good battle. I mean, Carson Hinsman was obviously the higher-rated recruit, but now Vic Cutler has a lot of snaps under his belt at the collegiate level, and even if he was playing D3 football, that's still the collegiate level. Even though it was the Sun Belt, that's Division I, which I wish we still called it. That's still FBS football. Those are valuable reps. I mean, he's got 3 years under his belt playing and against not just against Sun Belt teams, but against good teams, as you mentioned, like Texas and Alabama. So, against good teams like Alabama. Sorry, any Texas fans that are probably not watching this. But no, I love the Vic Cutler get because at the very worst, it gives you a 6th man on the offensive line. And at the very best, I think he could be a decent starter this year. And then you have him for another year next year. So I think that was a really good get.
Yeah, and I wrote about this last week. Justin Fry not backing down from the challenge of finding 3 new starters. He called them. He said just makes them hungrier. The fact that they know that they're probably the biggest question mark, the biggest uncertainty on the offense, maybe the whole roster. I think you could debate that with some of the defensive questions, but this offense has a lot of talent coming back, which includes these 2 quarterbacks. If the offensive line is right, they should be elite again, but he's got to get that. And he had no issue discussing that. I think we should also quickly talk about the 2 returning guys in Donovan Jackson and Matthew Jones. Dave, just when you're already about to lose 3 guys, just how big is it to have 2 guys who are going to stay at guard, at least for now? And as it was pointed out to Justin Fry, if they do stay at guard, you have an inexperienced tackle, experienced guard, inexperienced, experienced. So you at least will have those guys in between the inexperienced guys on the line. How big is it for Matthew Jones and Donovan Jackson to be back for the Buckeyes?
Yeah, I mean, it is a nice luxury there. I mean, it's like we're talking about how bad it is Ohio State's losing like 3 starters, and like not just 3 starters, but 3 guys that are going to be taken within the first 3 rounds of the NFL draft. But to have Matt Jones and Donovan Jackson is back is huge. Donovan Jackson, to me, is definitely a future NFL player. 5-star recruit. I thought he played really well as a first-year starter this past season, and I think he's going to be really, really good as a left guard as a junior. Now that he's got a full year of starting under his belt, played a lot as a true freshman, in that jumbo package, as we mentioned. And then Matt Jones coming back for a 6th year. I didn't necessarily see that coming. If you would have asked me beginning this year, not that I thought he was going to be a high NFL draft pick. I just thought, even though I knew he had an extra year because he redshirted and then the COVID year, I didn't think he'd be a guy that'd come back for a 6th year. Finally was a first full-time starter last year. I think that's big for Ohio State because I think they're going to be able to at least figure something out, at tackle. As my dogs try to come back in here, the door's open. You're allowed to come back in, Anna. She's like scratching on the door like I have it closed. So yeah, I think I kind of got off course here, but no, having Donovan Jackson and Matt Jones back is absolutely huge for Ohio State.
All right, let's flip it over to the defensive side of the ball and the defensive line specifically, staying inside the trenches there. David, it hasn't been the production that I think Buckeye fans were used to from the defensive line these last few years. I think that there is something about Jim Knowles' defense where he said it very clearly. It's a safety-driven defense. It's about handling things as the defensive backs, which at times, obviously, we didn't see last year. So I don't think you need to have as much talent, as much pressure up front as maybe you did in some of these defenses past that Ohio State's run. But it would still be nice to see that in production increase, especially as you got guys like JT Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer, experienced guys now, guys on the interior as well. What are kind of your expectations for this defensive line, maybe in a general sense, and then we'll get more specific about certain guys as they head into 2023?
Yeah, it's hard to say because they've underperformed the last few years, and I don't know if that's a Larry Johnson thing. I don't know if you put that on the players. I think certain guys have been playing too many snaps. And I realize I'm just like a guy that Larry Johnson has forgotten more football than I'll ever know. I get that, so I always like preface it with I love Larry Johnson and he's a legend, but like I do feel like he doesn't play his best guys enough. Teron Vincent should not just have probably not led this team, the defensive tackles and snaps, but he definitely shouldn't have been like twice as much as anybody else. Now, in fairness to Larry Johnson, like Mike Hall was hurt, so who knows about that. But I thought Tyleik Williams should have played more. Teron Vincent should have played less. What are they doing with Jack Sawyer? Is Larry Johnson on the same page with Jim Knowles? Doesn't seem like they are on the same page. Jim Knowles talking about things like starters are starters for a reason. Man, yeah, you got to keep guys fresh, but starters are starters for a reason. Especially in big moments, Patrick. I'm not talking about like if you're up by like 30 in the third quarter where the game's not quite over yet, but but I'm talking about like in big games, Larry just rotates. It's always like, it just seems a little bit too fire drillish to me. It's like a little bit too much of a revolving door there where you got to play your best player. So what do I expect? I expect JT Tuimoloau to break out as a star this year. I don't know what to expect from Jack Sawyer. So far, I see him as not like a bust, like some people are calling him, but more on the Zach Harrison trajectory where, Zach Harrison's going to hear his name called in the draft. Zach Harrison was a second-team All-Big Ten player. So, listen, there's middle ground. Everybody doesn't have to be a superstar or a bust, but I do see Jack Sawyer more in that middle ground. I hope I'm wrong. I hope he is more superstar. But I see JT Tuimoloau breaking out this year And then I hope, Patrick, that Mike Hall and Tyleek Williams are getting a ton of snaps at D tackle. Those guys need to play a lot. And then rounding out the 2 deep, Ty Hamilton, of course. But I want Hero Canoe playing a lot at D tackle as that, on the 2 deep. And then at defensive end, we need to see Kenyatta Jackson and Caden Curry and Amari Abor play. All 3 of those guys, especially I think Caden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson. I mean, nothing against Amari. I like Amari Abor too. I'm just saying Caden Curry, we've seen it. Kenyatta Jackson, I think, has an extremely high ceiling. They lost Javonte Jean-Baptiste, who's going for a 6th year to Notre Dame. Zach Harrison. There's a lot of snaps available that were there last year. Zach Harrison played a ton of snaps. So obviously JT Tuimoloau needs to be out there a lot. Jack Sawyer, we'll see. I want to see JT Tuimoloau out there like a ton. But I also want to see Caden Curry out there. See which one of those young guys emerge. And by the end of the season, one of those guys might be out there a vast majority of the time. So what do I expect? I expect a very good defensive line. But got to be honest, I won't be surprised if I'm underwhelmed because it feels like the last few years I've gone into the season thinking this is what I expect out of the defensive line, and it hasn't done that. 2019, I remember going into the season saying this is going to be a great defensive line, and it was. Okay, so like the last 3 years, it's underachieved in my opinion. Can 2023 be different? We'll find out. They have the talent.
I think some of the points you brought up between Larry Johnson and Jim Knowles are really interesting because Ryan Day brought in Jim Knowles to run this defense, called it being the head coach of the defense. And you'd think that you'd want to match that. And obviously they did in the secondary. They brought in, after they'd hired Jim Knowles, Tim Walton and Perry Eliano. So I feel like the potential disconnect between Larry Johnson and Jim Knowles is something they probably should have addressed when they were making this hire. And now you're going into year 2 and it's still being questioned. And like the biggest thing for me, Larry Johnson, when we talked to the coaches in early February, just over a month ago, Larry Johnson was like, Jack Sawyer should be in the defensive end room. I want him, playing defensive end. That's what he was recruited to play. And, maybe you could have a linebacker play that Jack position. And then you asked Jim Knowles about it. Somebody asked Jim Knowles about it, and you got kind of the opposite answer. And who knows what, maybe they just didn't want to say, one guy didn't want to say something publicly, and maybe they're doing something else behind closed doors. Maybe
they're like 20 feet away from each other. They didn't know it, but they were like being asked the same question about 20 feet apart.
Yeah, that was the, obviously there wasn't something right in terms of production, but that to me was like, what's happening here? Why are these two not in lockstep when talking about a player like Jack Sawyer, who I still think can do a lot for this team? I think maybe the Jack role wasn't the right decision for him last year. So maybe putting him as a true defensive end, letting him do what he did best in high school, it seems to me to make sense. But I also understand this is Jim Knowles' defense. So I will be very interested to see how these two kind of mesh their ideas, if they do, this season. And Mike Hall is the other one that stands out to me as, look, if this kid had been healthy this past year, I mean, the Michigan State game is the one that I think of when I think about Mike Hall. He played, 12 snaps in that game and had 3.5 sacks or so. Yeah, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it was crazy impressive. And then, just to not be able to get on the field as much as he would have liked, you got to hope for his sake and for the Buckeyes' sake, he can be healthy and play a full season, because I do think he's a guy, he's kind of a missing piece in that interior of the defensive line that could really change some things. And, you saw it in small sample size. I thought we were going to see it more against Georgia. He talked the talk of being healthy, but then again, so did Mayan Williams, and we barely saw him. So maybe we shouldn't just believe players when they say they're back and ready to go. But I think he could be a game-changing type of guy in the interior of the defensive line.
I really do too. I mean, we had Kevin Wilson, who's now gone. What do they call him? Ron Wilson on Bucknuts. A little inside joke there. But he said during spring last year, because they were like, at times Mike Hall would rep with the third team, and he goes, Kevin Wilson, I almost called him Ron. Kevin Wilson goes, that's the best third team defensive tackle in football history right there. As Scooby comes back in, at least so, excuse me, but my dogs are they're being puppies. They're just being dogs. I'm not going to apologize. They're awesome. All right. Anyway, so Mike Hall can be an absolute wrecker. He's a guy like, I'm not going to say Aaron Donald, your boy. I'll compare him more to a Geno Atkins, who like was, still really, really, really good. Those, as you guys know what I'm talking about, those like 6 foot tall, like 300 pound, defensive tackles that are extremely strong, but move like they're an outside linebacker. That's my call. And yeah, the only thing that hurt him last year, I can't remember what game it was. It was one of those early games. It was like Toledo or something like that, where he hurt that shoulder. And you could even see it because he got pulled and you're thinking, oh man, I hope that's nothing. And then he downplayed it all. They downplayed it all year, but oh man, but then his snaps went down. Man, if he can stay healthy, he's going to be a stud. And then you pair him with Tyleek now in his junior year, hopefully getting the right amount of snaps. I think they can be really good at defensive tackle if they stay healthy. And again, Hero Kanu, hopefully he's a redshirt freshman. I believe he's technically a redshirt freshman. I don't know if he played more than 4 games or not. Second-year player, Hero Kanu. I like him. And then Ty Hamilton's going to play, and play a decent amount. But I think Larry Johnson needs to play those 2 main guys, Mike Hall, and then Tyleek Williams as much as possible.
Before we end this conversation on the defensive line, I do want to touch on this jack position because this was something we were talking about a lot last offseason, and we saw it for the first time a little bit in spring. We'd heard about Jack Sawyer. Mitchell Melton was a guy who was mentioned as a guy who could play that. He tore his ACL in the spring game. How do you think they can best use this? Do they even need a position like this? I know at Oklahoma State it worked out really well, but you're Ohio State. Do you need this hybrid role, or can you just use the guys you have? I mean, what's just kind of your vantage point on the jack position and what it can be for the Buckeyes?
Yeah, I think it's something that they should mix in if they feel like they need to and they want to. Like, I don't think it needs to be a staple. I think they need to be multiple, and that's supposed to be Jim Knowles' calling card. Is he's going to mix things up, keep you guessing. You don't need a jack on every play, a Leo, whatever they want to call it. And then, is Jack Sawyer best suited for that? Maybe not. Maybe it is. I tend to agree with people who tend to think that Jack Sawyer's best put his hand in the ground and get off the edge, go after the quarterback, or it's a running play, seal the edge, go after the running back, whatever it might be just a traditional defensive end. And yeah, I think Mitchell Melton was in line to be, if not the starting jack, to play a lot last year if he didn't get hurt. Now you could say, well, now he's going to be back healthy. Well, now he's had 2 major injuries, right? So it's like every year we go in with guys like, Court Williams, for example, at safety. It's like, man, if he can stay healthy, but he's had so many like serious injuries, you feel terrible for the kid. Is he like now on the Cam Babb trail where like everybody loves him? If he's healthy, everybody knows he would ball out. But he's just had so many so much bad luck. Like, what's going to happen there? So we'll see what happens. But with Mitchell Melton, I'm on wait and see. If he's healthy, I've heard nothing but great things about him. You know what, Patrick? I think Caden Curry could be a guy that plays there. If they determine that, listen, we're going to play JT Tuimoloau a lot, which they should. Don't get him off the field unless he's gassed, which is what I am preaching about. And then say Jack Sawyer steps up is that other one. We like these 2. So Caden's not going to get that many reps at D end. There's one thing I'll say about like breaking up snaps. That needs to be Ryan Day's call or Jim Knowles. If Larry Johnson's doing something that Ryan Day doesn't want or Jim Knowles doesn't want, then they need to step in and say, no, this is how we're doing it. So if Larry Johnson's rotating too many guys, that's actually on Ryan Day or Jim Knowles. But yeah, I think Caden Curry is a guy that if he's not, a starting defensive end or not playing a lot at defensive end, maybe he's that guy. If they use the jack that can play that role, I like him a lot. I like Caden Curry a lot. Maybe Kenyatta Jackson can do it. Maybe Sonny Styles can do it. CJ Hicks. They've got dudes. Everybody's like, well, they don't have a lot. They've got 5-star guys all over this defense. I mean, JT Tuimoloau, 5-star. Jack Sawyer, 5-star. CJ Hicks, 5-star. Sonny Styles, 5-star. Let's quit acting like this is a bunch of 3-star guys and then a bunch of 4-stars as well. So let's go. So those are some of the guys. I don't know if Sonny Styles is going to be the jack this year, but those are some of the guys that could be in the mix.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting because a guy like CJ Hicks, a guy like Sonny Styles, especially CJ Hicks, where like there's not a clear position for him to compete for with Tommy Eichenberg and Steele Chambers coming back. So like you got to get this kid on the field. I mean, he's too talented to sit. He only played special teams last year. And I know we're going away from defensive line a little bit, but he's just too talented for me to not be on the field to help this defense next year. Same with Sonny Styles, though I think there is a bit more opening with Ronnie Hickman leaving in terms of where he could potentially slot in at safety. yeah, I do think they've got guys. It's just a matter of being creative, figuring out where to put them, and how they fit into that. But Dave, thank you for coming on, joining the happy hour. Thank your dogs for joining the happy hour. I do appreciate it. And I think that was some good Buckeye football chat there.
That was fun. And then, spring ball kicks off on Tuesday. We'll be out there. Good seeing a lot of the people. It's funny, like with doing these podcasts, like I recognize like almost all of these names, that are in here, like commenting. It's really cool. Like this community that we've built with, Buckeye podcasting and stuff. So I appreciate you having me on your podcast. I've had you on my podcast many, many times. This is not my first time on your podcast, but thank you for having me on, and have fun with the Timmy Hall.
Yeah. Tim's going to stop by here shortly. We're going to talk some hoops.
His hair looks great, by the way.
Yeah, mine
he's gone through all the different stages. He's gone through like the really where it's like really spiked up, like big, Then he's gone through the like kind of like almost like a bigger version of what Mark Pantoni does, where it's like short in the front, like but like grows up a little bit in the middle. Now he's kind of doing like a little bit of the slicked back look. I think he's found his best look. We'll see what the commenters think. When Timmy Hall comes on, ask him about his hair. It'll make him happy, and I think it looks good. So, thank you, Bucknutters.
I will pass that along,
Patrick. Yes, his hair's looking good.
All right, that was Dave Biddle from our side at Bucknuts and 247 Sports. Thanks again for Dave coming on. Always brings good insight, and I think it's a little unfortunate that on the BM5, he's usually hosting it, so he doesn't always get to give his opinions on things. That's why I like to have Dave on, because he does provide some really good insight. And if you missed any of that, we were touching on Ohio State's offensive line, where they're going to have to replace the 3 starters. Not going to be an easy job there. Defensive line as well. You still have to replace some starters, but I think you're a bit more confident, at least right now, before we get into spring ball, about some of the guys on the defensive line. As Dave and I touched on, it's more about the chemistry between Larry Johnson, Jim Knowles, how that's all going to work, where guys are going to fit is the big thing. So, as I mentioned, we're going to transition here in the kind of final third of this podcast into some Buckeye hoops talk, because this team has been an enigma most of this year. Well, just bad most of this year. But all of a sudden, they have put together back-to-back wins against 2 solid Big Ten teams. They beat Illinois on Sunday at home, and then last night, we're recording this on Thursday afternoon. So on Wednesday night, they beat Maryland at home, and that was the final home game. I wrote about how the seniors kind of kick-started, set the tone, so to speak, on their senior night. Justice Suing, Sean McNeil, Isaac Likely. Interestingly, these seniors, none of them started their career at Ohio State. Now, Justice Suing was here for 4 years in total, only played really in 2. But a weird kind of senior night when you have a group of guys that weren't recruited initially by Ohio State, didn't commit to Ohio State, and then 2 of them, Likely and McNeil, only played 1 year. But they were able, all 3 of them were able to get things going for the Buckeyes off the jump, I should say, last night against Maryland, and Buckeyes rolled. I mean, Maryland fought, but Ohio State was able, as Chris Holtman put it, to kind of keep them at a distance throughout the game, responded to every push. And this was a Maryland team who really blitzed the Buckeyes started the second half when they played down in College Park, in January. So I will be interested to hear what Timmy thinks about this team, but I'll give you my thoughts while we wait for him to pop on here. The end of season Buckeyes, these last 2 games, is what I expected this team to look like throughout the year, and it just never did until these final 2 games. And you look at last night's game, for instance. You've got the scoring distributed fairly evenly across the board. All 5 starters scoring in double figures. You had, I believe 6 guys. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, 6 with Bryce Sensabaugh coming off the bench, scoring at least 10 points. The Buckeyes talked at the beginning of the year how they wanted to be a team they thought they were a team that could do something like this, where there wouldn't be a go-to scorer every night. You wouldn't know who that guy was going to be. Now, Bryce Sensabaugh emerged as that guy, but he has struggled at times if defenses have really keyed on him, I should say. It hasn't been as easy for him in Big Ten play to score, especially the latter half here. So this game was much more efficient. Ohio State shot 48% from the field, 35.7% from three-point range, made all 20 of their free throws, which is a program record. This is what I expected to see from the Buckeyes. I didn't expect it to be great every night. I didn't expect this team to be, a consistent top 15 team. But to me, it was, okay, the senior guys, the elder guys who have played, how do they set the tone for these young freshmen, talented but still a little raw? And that was how I think a lot of games played out in the non-conference. And then you saw the emergence of Bryce Sensabaugh, and they could just never find that again, really, once they lost that game to Purdue. So it's interesting to see this kind of like reform, probably too little too late, only, winning 2 games in a row here. But certainly you like to see at least something come out of it. And our guy Timmy Hall has popped on. Hey, Timmy.
Hey, can you hear me, Patrick?
You sound fantastic.
All right, good. I'm trying to get that ugly bright light out of the frame. There we go. Look at that, a radio. I'm not even using this, huh?
It's not even necessary. All right, real quick before we go back to the hoops talk.
Mm-hmm.
Before Biddle hopped off here, he was talking about your variations of hairstyles over the last few years. He thinks this is what should be your go-to. Do you think you found your ideal hairstyle?
No, we're still going. That's the whole point of this. You see, I'm not really quite sure what the end game is or how this goes. I originally started to grow it out in the pandemic when everybody was sort of trying new things in life, right? So I kind of jumped on board with a couple things. I always have been curious and wondered what it would be like what would castaway me look like? Like, clearly for everyone, there has to be a point where you don't cut your hair for so long, it eventually has to fall down a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Like some people have thicker, like I have thicker, poofier, wavier hair. So usually, if I go like the 4 to 6 months, which is a long, long time without getting a haircut, it would just continue to grow out. But what if I push through that awkward phase? What if I get through that time and then go upwards of like 8 months to a year? Will it actually become shoulder length? Will we have like a Dave Grohl Foo Fighters situation? I don't know. I don't even know if it's going to get to that, but I've even gotten it trimmed, like trimming behind the ears or trimming the back up a little bit so it looks okay while you're growing it. I figured I would try something and see how the look goes. I don't know. You like it? All right.
I do like it. I usually keep my hair very short, as you know. The pandemic saw me grow out my hair, but it was the beard that everyone noticed, which was down to, about here. I have not cut my hair in a while just because it's been cold out. And usually I just my girlfriend buzzes my hair in the backyard because it's easy.
Wow. In the backyard, not even the bathroom?
Nope. We just go in the backyard. I sweep it up when we're done. Usually there's not that much because I just keep it really short.
I thought this was a Big Ten country show, not an SEC country show.
Well, that's the problem.
The hillbillies there. It's
been too cold. So you see Biddle in here. This is what he's talking about with he wants to see Castaway Timmy Hall. Yeah, so I don't know. I've grown. My problem is I don't know what to do with it once it gets too long where I can't just like get out of bed and have it be
right.
normal. So I ran some water through it today, but I don't know. I don't know how to handle longer hair anymore.
I'm using a leave-in conditioner now. It's a lot. It's a lot that's going into this. I can get maybe remember when Conan O'Brien's hair was to a point where he could just like literally do things with it during the show.
Yeah.
And get the crazy hair. I can kind of go along with that, kind of at that stage of it right now, but we'll see. We'll see. I think I think I have my mother's hair. Like I see the way her hair is, and she's got more of the wavier. She doesn't have super long hair, but it's I kind of have that style. So thanks, Ma. Appreciate the hair.
There you go. Well, let's get back to Buckeye Hoops talk because that's what you're really here for. I was just saying before you popped in to the happy hour that, look, this is these last two games have looked a lot more like what I expected this team, especially last night with the balanced scoring and the upperclassmen kind of setting the tone. What have you made of these two wins? Because it's probably, as I said right as you jumped in, I think it's probably too little too late, but college basketball, with the nature of postseason play, hot teams can make a run. We've seen it. I mean, I don't expect this team to go through and win the Big Ten tournament, but you'd like to be playing better at the end of the season, right? And we've seen probably two of the best games this team's played in 2023, these last two. So what do you make of this kind of late season surge that they've had?
Well, two things here, Patrick. And I've been saying this on the show recently and reiterated this on the post-game show last night, is you don't really get any credit for just continuing to lose games in college sports, right? That doesn't do you any good.
No draft picks.
There's no draft picks, right? There's no tanking. If anything, the worse you play, the worse it's going to be for you in the offseason, because this is a sport where you have to recruit. So your reputation matters. And, limping to the finish line after you already had a ridiculously bad stretch does nobody any good. And as you said there, I'm not going to jump on board and thinking that they can, ride some kind of magical run. I will need to see 2 wins in the Big Ten tournament before I even start to think that. Like, I'll need to wake up on Friday and the Buckeyes will have to be playing before I start, clapping my hands and saying, oh boy, like they don't want to see the Buckeyes today, right? Like it's a ways before we get there. But they beat 2 NCAA tournament teams. Can we just give them credit for not packing up the tent and going home and feeling bad about themselves, feeling sorry about things? They have chosen to go to work here. They have chosen to play for each other, to play for themselves as basketball players, as competitors, to go out and beat the guys that are in front of them. So, I think for all of us who loved basketball as kids growing up and remember just playing even on the playground or whatever level, there's something cool about that. And they closed the home gym the right way, won their last 2 games at the Schottenstein Center. It had been a pretty miserable year there. We didn't get very many great games anyway, and the schedule didn't fit to where we've seen it work better in the past. So I like how they did that. And I was also looking for something other than Bruce Thornton to sort of spark here down the stretch. And we saw that now with Felix Okpara. So there's another guy, Roddy Gale, we've mentioned him a couple times, guys that we see as being here for a while developing. But Felix Okpara, I think, is starting to show people some bigger things. And I also, man, are you convinced that Bryce Sensabaugh is done here?
I was going to ask you that, because I said the same thing about Malachi Branham last year. I didn't think his game was well-rounded enough for the NBA. If you've watched Malachi Branham play for the very terrible Spurs, you'll see that I was really wrong about that, because he's one of the best things that they've got going for him. But to me, Bryce isn't even that level right now. He can score, but, last night, post-game, Chris Holtman said he thought this was one of his best games. He was 4 of 11 from the floor and 0 of 4 from 3. Now, he did get 12 points, 7 rebounds. I did think he played more in the flow of the offense, but you gotta play defense. I know they say the NBA is, they don't play defense, but they do. And I just don't think there's enough to his game yet other than scoring. And I think you've seen there are ways to slow him down, to frustrate him. He's got a lot of ability putting the ball on the court and, driving. But, his numbers, I don't have them in front of me recently, but scoring at the basket is really low. He was second worst on the team last time I checked. So he's made up for that most of this year with good mid-range game, some really good three-point shooting. But, to me, this is a guy who could be a high lottery pick with another year. And we actually had a story on our site. It was one of the national basketball writers wrote about how, he could bet on himself and come back next year. Not suggesting that he would, just saying how this could play out if he did. And I thought there were some good points, and people can go read that. It was by Adam Finkelstein. To me, I'm always towards coming back in college basketball, unless you are that elite, Greg Oden, Mike Conley, guys like that. But I know guys don't do that. I would think you have to at least consider it. Sure, he's going to test the waters, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I would think he's got to consider coming back with the way the season has ended.
I'm still going to lean. I think I'm still like 80-20 that he's gone, Patrick. But I guess the point, the point to make there is I didn't really talk about this much on the post-game show. It was more focused on the future of the team and the fact that they've won these last 2 games. Let's keep it simple and maybe avoid the bigger picture, big, season-long topics, because we've come to grips with that. I mean, they were so bad for so long that we came to terms with that they're okay, 8-9 games under 500. It's going to be an under 500 season. No one likes that. That's really bad, but we already understood that. So let's just talk about these wins and keep it that way. But I didn't really focus much on the part that very well could have been Bryce Sensabaugh's last game in front of home fans in a Buckeye uniform. And I think the way the season has gone is a reason for that, where if you're going to have a one and done and you're going to have a guy like D'Angelo Russell who just paces the team and is clearly that best guy, and he's a superstar player that's getting national recognition, and he was scoring more than Bryce. Like, let's be honest. Like, that guy was fixing to be a top 3 pick. There's a difference there, and the team was a lock to make the NCAA tournament, and they won a game in the NCAA tournament. Didn't go to the Sweet 16, and that's something. And even Malachi last year, the way that he was – go ahead. What'd you say?
He carried them to the NCAA tournament and to that, that's how good Russell was. If you're Bryce, he hasn't done that.
Agreed. So there's that difference with D'Angelo. And even the difference with Malachi is also you had a team that was a lock to go to the NCAA tournament, even though they kind of did tarnish their seed in those last 4 to 6 games in Big Ten play. And that was a problem, which is some things we've seen with Holtman teams here. But you had EJ, and you still had a tournament team and a team that went to the second round and won there. With Bryce, it's tough for what your legacy or the memory will be of a player as far as the college team is concerned when you're a one and done, and that season that you had was one that's completely forgettable. No one really wants to remember 2022-23 Ohio State basketball. Hopefully it just gets marked down as a rebuild year and things get right back to a certain type of level. And then, to be honest, they go above the level that they have been at. But that's why. And, you're right. It's not a done deal. You said you'd be leaning towards coming back because of, where this is going and how he's a fringe first rounder and not a consensus for everybody that studies these things. What my worry is we've seen a lot of guys in this program, whether they were coming after their freshman seasons or not be thought of as first round picks. Some of them weren't even thought of as NBA guys, but dudes have still left eligibility on the table and passed on what could have been a really fun, really built looking Ohio State basketball season had they stayed and they went on and did their own things. I think of Caleb Wesson, if he came back, that would have been what year would that have been if Caleb had come back? Because he left a year of eligibility on the table, and that would have been, I think, a EJ Liddell team, and
right.
would have mixed in with that. That could have been something to have that veteran presence on the front line there. LaQuinton Ross didn't come back and use a year where the NBA was not in his future. So I would still think that Bryce would be gone, but you're right. Not a done deal, but to me, he'd still be going to the NBA draft.
Yeah. To clarify, look, I think he goes because I think most guys go, as you made the point. I just think there's an argument, especially recently, if he'd continued to score, if he was still, I think at one point he was the 3rd top scoring freshman in the country. And if he'd continued to do that when he was being talked about as a lottery pick, hard to argue. I do think, to your point, like this team, when they were envisioning this team, the coaching staff, they envisioned it with Malachi Branham being here and being a part of it. And then Malachi obviously explodes in the second half of last year. And that, plans change in college sports all the time. But then you've got to readjust. Now Bryce is in a bigger role in that position, and now he has to step up. Does that cost them again, so to speak? I think is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you look to next year, if you were to add Bryce Sensabaugh to that group of the returning freshmen that'll be sophomores and the freshmen coming in, okay, now that's a pretty interesting team. And if he does leave, as we kind of are alluding to, how do you replace? Where do you replace Bryce? You got to go to the portal again and hope something works out, because let's be honest, they haven't actually hit on a ton of portal guys so far. So I think his decision is pretty big in terms of what's going to happen down the road here.
Uh-oh.
Are you there?
Are we stable again?
Good. Anyway, sorry about that. Let's talk just about
Patrick. How's your internet?
Can you hear me?
There we go. Are you stable?
You got it?
Nope. Well, guys, I don't know if you can hear me. My video is showing pretty clear when he's talking about next year for Ohio State basketball, and especially Bryce. Like, yes, if he's going to be gone, you're going to need a bucket getter. And, Bruce Thornton is great to have. You can't expect Roddy Gale to take that kind of step next year with losing Justice Suing, losing Sean McNeil, guys that can shoot. You absolutely do have to go into the portal and play that game again. That's a year-to-year thing, too. And I haven't looked at some of the guys that are going to become available around college basketball, but I will as we approach the offseason, once we get there and find out everybody that's going to be in it. But you also look at these true freshmen and look, like, you're going to need Scotty Middleton, Tazon Chapman, Devin Royal. One of those three guys is going to wind up, and probably Devin Royal, the dude from Pick Central right here in Central Ohio. He is so good, and I think fans will be excited to have a local product here, like when we had the Wesson twins. So I think he could be somebody that could provide some offensive lift. It might be more of a platoon style where you don't have, if it's not going to be Bruce Thornton and we're considering Bryce to be gone, it might not be the guy that's going to average 17 or 18 a game, but you might have a lot of guys that can get into that low double figures. And we're also forgetting to mention Zed. I'm not going to be banking on it as much as I did going into this year, because I was kind of out there. I went out on a limb, and I thought Zed was going to have a marvelous season. I thought I was hearing the right things and seeing the right things in the offseason. And even before the injury, I'll take that one. I did not see the kind of development that I wanted from a guy that was going to get a bulk of the minutes starting as a 4 or a 5 for this basketball team. And outside of a couple of those games, I really saw a guy that was, low double figure scoring and maybe hitting that 8-9 rebound mark. I'd love to see more 18, 19, 20 point games and 14, 15 rebound games when we get him at their peak. But if we're going to see some Zed and Felix on the court at the same time, I'll allow him his chances to develop again. Even coming off of the injury, it's going to be a smaller offseason. But Pat, yeah, just talking about some of those things you mentioned, what it could look like next year. And you're right. If Bryce, and you could throw up John's statement up there. John says, I think he should absolutely come back. He could be a top 10 pick if he has another year of development. I agree with you, John. If it were me and I learn that I'm really a late first round pick, like I'd have to get lucky for a team to take a stab on me at say 25 through 30. And more likely than not, I'm a early to mid round, second round pick. I would come back because I think if I can show people, I work on my body a little bit, conditioning. He's already got a nice 6'6", big bodied frame. If I can rebound better, show that intensity that I care enough on the defensive end and just go nuts as an offensive player, because he really could be a 20 to 22 point per game guy if he came back. And then, yes, you're talking lottery pick. So I get some NIL and then I go and get a major paycheck. Obviously, I'll take that insurance policy in case, something to secure me for major injury, but I wouldn't be thinking that way. I'm a basketball player. I'm not thinking about the big injury. I'm thinking about what's best for my development, what's best for my overall future. And I would be taking a serious look at that. I just don't know if that's how everybody thinks, who's there to get, some kind of money, and with G League options, other professional avenues that you can take. But I would like to stay in the same place with the same coaching, with the same teammates that I have, and try to build do something better. So I think college basketball is still fun. I'm one of those rare ones, and missing out on the NCAA tournament in my 1 year in college hoops would not be something that I could go to sleep at night being good with. I can't be that good and go to college basketball and not have a trip to the big dance. I couldn't do it.
Yeah, I think that would be tough if you're Bryce to not play in that. But we've seen guys do it before. Let me ask you this to close out, Tim, and I apologize for the internet. I think my dog ran into the router there. This is the problem of doing these things from home. Do you think that let's say Ohio State wins, whether they win on Saturday against Michigan State, but at least gets a game in the Big Ten tournament. So they win 3 out of 4 to end the season. Well, I guess it'd be 3 out of 5. But do you think that can carry over with the guys that do return to help spark things for next year? Can this, even though it may not affect them this year, could it help next year in your eyes?
You got to believe that, right? I mean, what Bruce Thornton has done already in these last couple of games, how does that not carry over into next year? What Felix Okpara just did in this most recent game. I mean, the dude was borderline dominating out there. As much as a true freshman big who's had such limited minutes up into this point, that's as good a game as you could possibly hope for. I mean, the guy had 12 and 12 in 3 blocks. And as I tweeted, the dad in me says, don't just focus on the blocks. Focus on the shots that he altered, right? How many different shots did he affect? How many guys didn't even shoot the ball because Felix Okpara was playing defense in there? And one of those defensive possessions late, I don't remember if it was Jameer Young or Dante Scott or Martinez who had a good game, drove into the paint and then didn't get a shot up because I think he freaked out because Felix was there and the ball got slapped away or he lost the handle on it and it was a steal and Ohio State was taking the ball the other way. So I do believe that, man, if they can just take this practice time that they have and be serious about it, which the coaching staff has told us they've been doing, even when they were still losing games and they lost that close one to Penn State, they had liked the way that they have been dedicating themselves in practice. And if they go out there and they take down Michigan State on the road at the Breslin Center, another tournament team, and their senior day, they win a game or 2 in the Big Ten tournament. Yeah, absolutely. Like, I'm not going to all of a sudden be happy about the way the season went, but playing better late will leave you with a better taste in your mouth as you go to the offseason. Simple as that.
Yeah, I agree. I think, look, that they could have just, as you said earlier, it's possible this team could have rolled over and just rolled this season out the rest of the way and gotten done with it. But there was some fight from these guys, especially the upperclassmen. Justice Suing said it last night about wanting to leave this place better than they probably have these last few weeks. So appreciate that.
Yeah.
I also appreciate you, Tim, taking your time to join the happy hour again. I didn't do it the last couple weeks, so it was good to be back. Had some other stuff going on. So thank you very much for hopping on, talking some hoops with us.
It's good to see you, Patrick, and thanks for all the fans who check this out. I appreciate all the hoops fans and the people that are passionate about Ohio State basketball because I certainly think it should be a school where we give a flip about hoops as much as we do with football because look, it needs to be better. I'm on that side of it. It needs to be better. It should be better. And I hope it's going that way. I do. I like to watch basketball being played the right way, and when it goes the way that it went the last 2 games, that's kind of nice. Like that's what it's about, consistency. We know that. So winning 2 games doesn't solve all the problems, but play better down the stretch. And then we're going to evaluate next season the way that we have to evaluate it. It's got to be a lot better for Chris Holtmann. And we all kind of understand what Gene Smith had said and whether you guys agree, whether you all agree with it or not. That's the situation contractually. So hopefully they do a whole lot better next year than they did this season.
Yeah, much more fun to cover when they're winning than when we're talking about loss after loss after loss.
No doubt, man. I'm still going to enjoy the tournament. I know, like I went to school somewhere else, so I've got some dogs in the fight and family connections and all that who have their schools. It's fun to just hop on board. And the fact that Columbus has first and second rounds.
Yeah.
Guys, like get pumped up about that. In your town, if you're one of these, if you're watching this and viewing this or listening to this and you're local in Central Ohio, you got basketball at Nationwide Arena, and it's awesome. And the tournament is still the tournament. It sells itself.
Absolutely. Again, thank you, Tim. If you want to hear more from Tim, Buckeye Show, 97.1 The Fan. He occasionally lets me talk to him on there, so I appreciate that. But thank you again for jumping on the happy hour.
Yeah, buddy, and we'll see you for some beers and Buckeyes tomorrow on a Friday.
Right. It's really a matter of whether you're going to be there or not at this point.
I will.
All right. I'll talk to you then.
See you, man.
Thanks again for Tim Hall for hopping on. He is a hoops fanatic, and so he can talk some football too, as we've seen on the happy hour already this first kind of season. We've been doing this, but Tim loves some hoops. So in case you missed anything from this, if you hopped in live late, we talked football at the beginning, Buckeye football, which will start spring practice next week. The offensive line, defensive line were where Dave Biddle and I focused our talk. A lot of good stuff there, and some questions we hope to have some answers to as we make it through spring practice. And then Timmy and I talk some hoops and just kind of how potentially these 2 wins, these last 2 games, could help this team. Neither of us think they're going to make a crazy run and get to the NCAA tournament, but potentially beyond that. Plus, you just have some better feelings heading into the offseason. I'm going to wrap this one up. This was another long episode of the Bucknuts Happy Hour, a full hour plus. So I thank anyone who tuned in live and watched this. If you're listening after the fact, we appreciate that too. Please like, subscribe, all that good stuff. If you are not already, please follow Bucknuts247 on Twitter. I'm @_Pat_Murphy. You can find both those on Instagram as well. I appreciate all the support, and we try and do some good work for you guys. So cheers, Buckeye fans. Hope you have a good weekend. And Buckeye basketball Saturday, NFL Combine going on right now. Steve Hellwagon is out there for us covering that, so plenty of coverage. Stay tuned to that because there are 8 Buckeyes there hoping to improve their draft stock. So a lot of stuff going on here as we enter spring. Cheers.